Welcome back to ACFIM Talks from that short break. We are still discussing Ghana's oil. Is it a blessing? As this follows the final investment decision that was announced early last week, which officially unveils the long-awaited oil production in Uganda. And with me, I have ONESMUS MUGYENYI, who is the public policy analyst, and I also have with me WINFRED, who is the executive director for Global at Uganda. And we are having this discussion. And before we took a break, we were looking at whether the legal framework, the institutions are enough to protect us from this oil becoming a curse. In fact, to pick it up from there, and I'm going to start with you, WINFRED. The president, during that ceremony, made some very interesting comments about society. In fact, he said that he alluded actually to CSO's frustrating government efforts in developing the oil sector, tending to point to the fact that probably either we tend to portray a situation of as if we may not be able to manage and benefit from this oil. But overall, because it's our duty, you talked about it as our role to ensure that we keep these institutions in check, we make the process transparent as it could be, we make the institutions accountable, it could be concerning this natural resource. But what do you make of the president's comments, especially at the time he made them?
So first of all, I appreciate that the president is aware that there is civil society in Uganda and that it is doing commendable work. I think there is already a saying that a stationary vehicle does not raise dust. So listening to Mr. President and his remarks, I could tell that he acknowledges our role as civil society and he appreciates what we do. And so, yes, I want to thank him for the statement. He said some other words in Swahili, but I'm not very good at Swahili, so I don't know the other thing that he meant. I think his comment followed the speech of the CEO of Total Energies, Mr. Patrick Poyane, on allowing civil society to do the monitoring work. And indeed, the sector has been shaped by technocrats from the Ministry of Energy, by people from the legal fraternity, by economists, by citizens in their formations, including organized groups like civil society organizations, including non-governmental organizations, including church leaders. So every Ugandan has a right, every civil society in Uganda has a right and a responsibility to input in the processes, in informing the decisions on how we govern our natural resources. So that is a given. There has been, over the years, concerns from the civil society space in the way the space is shrinking. And largely because when you're on the ground working with affected communities, you appreciate how much Muntu an everyday person, is ignored in when and how decisions are being made. The Tilenga project, for example, affected over 5,523 people. The Kingfisher project affected over 727 people. The refinery project affected over 7,118 persons. And that is in acquisition of land for construction of the refinery, but also for the pipelines and for the other projects that are going on. The ECOP is going to affect so many people. Civil society comes in, one, to improve on the levels of awareness of communities in terms of their rights and their responsibilities. Before the intervention of civil society, there was usually a one-sided narrative. Give us your land, one is going to be rich, we're going to give you so much money. But people were not very well prepared in understanding, one, what options they had, for example, in what form of compensation they should have received, whether to choose cash or land for land. People had grievances, and the grievance handling mechanism was not very strong. people did not understand, even government officials themselves, they did not fully appreciate and understand where communities were coming from and what was at stake for them. Now, when civil society comes in to say, hold on, we want Uganda to develop, but how? How are you dealing with the person that you found here? How can they inform the process? How can they be part of monitoring what is going on? Do you understand their concerns? Do you understand their aspirations? Do you understand their interests? Can you put them in the in the Uganda bigger picture, or are you looking at only decisions that are being made by people from Kampala or by international oil companies and other investors? So when civil society comes and says, "Hold on, let us first go the round table and listen to each other," leadership, usually political leadership, tends to take that as inciting communities, as opposing investment, which is not the case. So the space in natural resource governance, not only in Uganda but worldwide, is very limited. But we are determined to work, support, to put our foot down, because we have not only a right but also a responsibility as Ugandans to make sure that our natural resources benefit us, our natural resources benefit the people, but also people who were already living, their lives should not be largely inconvenienced by the discovery, by the investment, but rather are positioned to benefit from the natural resources and to have their voice heard, and also to determine how what comes from our natural resources is invested and consumed. And we know that, today we have a number of civil society groups that have been suspended by the NGO Bureau due to various reasons, including, by the way, due to the weaknesses of the NGO Bureau. So we will, as the president said, we'll pick our mats, we'll pick our mattresses, we'll go to the communities, we'll work with them, we will input in the Uganda's natural resource governance, because that is what we are called to do as Ugandans in our formations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Actually, did instruct the LC5 chairpersons of those districts that allow them to go there. They are free to go and also sleep in the park if they will find anything substantive, interesting. ONESMUS, you could make a comment on that, but specifically help us understand, because again, in the same breath, the president is on record a couple of times saying, referring to this oil as my oil, and help us from where you have your perspectives. What do you make of the president's language? It's a possessive language of my oil, referring to national resource. What assurances do Ugandans have that this resource will benefit them and not just a few?
Thanks very much, Felix. If you allow me, I'll just put a rejoinder to what my sister has said on the president's statement, because I imagine that he's very much aware of the role of civil society, because the National Oil Gas Policy of 2008, the framers, which include the executive, of which is part, found it necessary to give a role to different stakeholders in this country, and they did recognize that there is a group called the civil society, and was also given a role to play in the National Oil and Gas Policy. And that role is basically holding government accountable. In other words, we are the watchdogs. And therefore, if you look into the mirror and it shows that you have dirt on your face, you don't break the mirror, you go and wash your face. And that's basically what we do. We reflect what is on the ground, and we expect the president and the other stakeholders to go and wash the face and not break the mirror. And we will continue to do that. until the laws have been changed, until the policies have been changed, to say that civil society is irrelevant, it does not play a role, but we'll continue to play our role. But leave alone being civil society, we also are citizens of this country. We are human beings and citizens of this country. And even if I do not belong to civil society, even if I do not belong to a code, I have a right, if I see an issue, to make a contribution and raise that issue so that that issue is addressed. But FELIX, civil society has played a fundamental role in this sector. If you look at all the laws that have been put in place, civil society has there a footprint. I mean, we've made contributions. We give alternative ideas, and some of these ideas have found their way into these policies. So we associate ourselves with these policy makers and the legislature that has been able to put these laws in place. And probably that's why we are proud of these laws. Going to the statement, the president calling it my oil, I think it relates basically to the time when we had active exploration activities relating to this sector. And I imagine that calling it my oil means that these activities became more active during his regime, because I know he's a very, very intelligent president. He knows that certainly this is not his oil, and I imagine that he uses that word in reference to his regime, because most exploration activities became active during his term of office. If he uses it to refer to something different, that will be unfortunate. But I want to believe that he uses it in good faith to mean that those activities have become active during his regime, which has done some positive things in a number of areas, but had also had its own challenges. I could probably.
Okay, there are some comments that are coming. All right. There are some comments that have been coming from the screen. I think there was one comment concerned with the future of civil society. What is the future of civil society following the remarks made by the president? The beauty is that he did allow civil society actors to actually go and follow the activities and ensure that everything is done according to the book. Also, there were some comments around whether CSOs are part of the unsung heroes that are greatly contributing to the sector. Indeed. But let me come to a question here, which I think, let me start with WINFRED on this one, concerning the way the partnership is structured and framed. When you look at the documentation, which I happen to come up with, and I'm sure you have it, in this joint venture partnership, the Uganda National Oil Company owns 15% upstream on the upstream projects, and then Total Energy is owning 56%, and CNOC 28.33. And then when you look at the Undercop project, you know which is taking care of the interest of Uganda, is only about 15%, and then Total 62%, CNOC 8%, meaning usually Total is the biggest shareholder, given the investment share capital in the oil production project. But when you look at the share value of Uganda, did we negotiate right? What's your take?
I think I wouldn't have a problem with having only 15%, because that also determines how much money you're willing to invest in the business. So by Uganda investing only up to 15%, of the required capital, I think it is okay, being that we are a small country, we are a poor country, so we do not have too much money to throw around, especially for a sector that we do not understand very well. as of now, because UNOC is going to be going to Parliament to get a budget reallocation. That is taxpayers' money. They are taking a risk, and it could pay us off, or we could lose it. Considering that, this is the first time we're investing in a sector like oil. We don't know how well, how trained our people at UNOC are. We know that they are trained, but we don't know how well they are able to manage the commercial interests, the oil game. We don't know, the politics that come with having a national oil company. Sometimes the money that, you put in doesn't even actually do the actual work. So I think for me, 15% is okay for a poor country like Uganda. And the question would be, what is the money that we are giving UNOC is doing, but also the money that UNOC receives as a business from doing business, where that money goes and how it is accounted for. Of course, the country will benefit from, will receive taxes, capital gains, the investments that are going to happen. So our benefits are not only stopping at UNOC's participation. Our benefits that we're going to reap far much and beyond UNOC's participation. So 15% is good. We can start with that. We can, make sure that UNOC does represent us well economically, and would be disappointed if it became some house for, channeling money to be swindled. Would be disappointed if they didn't make the right decisions and right investments. Would be disappointed if they did work that is out of scope of why they were formed and what they are supposed to do. For now, I think it's okay. It really should be okay. 15 shareholding is not something very small at all, as you may think it is. Even 10% would still be very good. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of investment required, but also it's a lot of money that comes in if they do smart business.
Let me. Sorry, let me ONESMUS on first of all, your thoughts on that share capital. I remember there was a time when the issue of production sharing agreements being made public was one of those things that civil society were pushing for. Eventually, that's now it's very clear how much government of Uganda is getting out of this. But is that a fair deal when you look at the distribution?
Thanks. Yeah, from where we are coming from, the joint venture, there are several models that countries have looked at. And when you weigh them, given the circumstances of the country, where you don't have a lot of capital, this is a very good model. And when you look at the level of investment that is required, you also realize that we don't have a lot of resources to invest. And therefore, we need really to look at that percentage vis-a-vis what we have as a country that we can actually invest. You realize that actually much of the capital is we are borrowing. When you borrow, you're expected to pay interest. If we had our own resources, yes, we would aspire to have certainly more shares. But given the circumstances, I think 15% is good enough. And we've also put in place laws and tax structures that can help us to make more money beyond the profits that we get as a result of this investment. So you can get money from this investment that we've done, but you're also able to get money from the taxes because of the fiscal regime that has been put in place. So when you look at it, it's a fair deal. It's a fair deal. We're happy about it. The most important thing is finally how it is executed, and the WIN has already indicated that if we don't have efficient monitoring system in place. Even when you have a very good fiscal regime, you can still have leakages and lose out on taxes. And you've already seen some of those aspects where we've been in court, international arbitration, dealing with taxes. So there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that we do adequate monitoring so that we don't lose money that we are entitled to. But on the face of it, I think it's a fair deal and we can go with that.
Okay. Okay. Question around the local content policies, whether it's going to benefit you, and we shall be answering that as one of our parting shots. But there's a question to WINFRED here, like I promised, concerning the way compensations have been handled, because Uganda has a history of undervaluing. We've seen many cases of where government undervalues properties of individuals that are supposed to be compensated when it comes to government projects. I want to understand how this has been handled concerning especially those communities where the pipeline is going to pass, because that at some point was a very big issue. How is this being handled, and how have they been really protected from being exploited?
I think we look at the issue of compensation from two angles. There is what people expect, and there is what the government is willing to pay. So the process for valuation starts with the local districts. They are the ones that do surveys and determine what things go for. What is the cost of land? What is the cost of food? What is the cost of a mango tree? This age? What is the cost of a house? And they work hand in hand with the chief government valuer's office. Usually, we have seen people complaining of low values, and sometimes it's been genuine, like the values are really low, and there has been push and shove between people that are affected, whose land is going to be taken, whose coffee is going to be cut, whose property is going to be, whose houses are going to be demolished, because they feel realistically that this money is not enough. And indeed, mediations have gone on, conversations have gone on, and in some cases, the prices or the values have been improved to reflect the circumstances on the ground. There are people that have rejected the values because they know what they invested in, they know what the actual value is, and they feel that government is not giving them a fair deal. And they have gone to court, and they have a right to go to court because they need to get what is fair. So compensation has to be fair, has to be adequate, and has to be timely. And that is what we tell companies, that's what we ask of government, that when they are undertaking compensation, they make sure that it is fair, it is adequate, and it is timely. The challenges we also see is that the cutoff dates are announced today, and people are not compensated 3 years later. And because expectations for oil are going up, the value of land is going up, speculation is in, people feel, and rightly so, that you cannot compensate them for or at the price at which you valued their land or property 3 years back. And those grievances are there, and we think that government should and must respond. The government has usually put a certain percent, I think 15%, if they delay. But even that 15% is less than what is required in terms of the inconveniences that are caused for the time that you take when you're not utilizing your land, when it has been earmarked, and you cannot utilize it, and you're not compensated to go and look for land elsewhere. But the major issues for me are who is at the table when compensation discussions are going on, who is compensated between the landowner, the land user, and people whose interests are not registered and not necessarily recognized in the compensation process. We find a lot of challenge around that. We find a lot of discrepancies between registered land and unregistered land and how it is valued. The While for me, land remains as variable, whether registered with a title or not. I think that contractors and government need to recognize that unregistered, untitled land is as variable as titled land, and so they should not dismiss people's concerns and tell them that their land is cheaper because it does not have a title. We find that women are not at the table, yet they use the land, they depend on that land when compositions are being discussed. We find that some crops are not counted, and these are genuine concerns that have to be addressed. There are other things that are very hard to put a price at. In rural areas, people, they will sit under a shade. They will have their lunch under a shade. They will do things. They will have medicines from provided by nature. But when competition is going on, or valuation is going on, how much do you pay for that shade that communities have been using, families have been using to sit under, to have their meals, to rest? How do you value a shade that because there's this tree that you've given money, yes, but we are using this tree beyond just the fruits. There is the shade, there is the medicine part of it, there is the cultural value attached to that. So we think that those are the concerns that valuers need to think through and understand that many things mean beyond economic value, and they also have to be compensated, and they have to be understood. The graves, the issues around grave reallocation, I think have also been of concern. Not very well valued, their transportation, their relocation, and the cultural norms and practices that go around, how we treat our departed relatives and family. There are issues to do with access to natural resources, to water, to firewood, that when we are, valuing our compensation and prices, we don't usually think through. Yet for an ordinary family member, for an ordinary man and woman, you need to make sure that when you compensate them or you reallocate them, you don't give them extra burden. You make sure that they have the exact services, or actually better services than they had before you compensated them, and that has to be part of the evaluation exercise. That has to be part of the evaluation report, and that has to be appreciated and paid. The COVID pandemic, of course, affected a lot of works around the ECOP. So land which had been earmarked, but compensation did not come in time because work stalled. There were some challenges here and there, and we understand that. But we felt that information flow from the duty bearers on what was going on, and when compensation was expected, so that people can move on, can reallocate on. When application was going to be done, it was not communicated in time, and that causes misinformation, that causes anxiety, and that takes away social license that investors and government need for projects like ECOP to succeed. By and large, I think that the issue of gender really needs to be given attention. The young people, but at the end of the day, all Ugandans need to benefit. We shouldn't look at the pipeline as a bigger picture and forget that there was life before the pipeline, and there will always be life during and after the pipeline. So let's treat our people better. Let's discuss compensation and valuation. Let us not throw the big words around and intimidate people that are asking for fair, for adequate compensation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That you really done justice. Our time is spent. 3 minutes into the top of the hour. I'm just going to allow ONESMUS a parting short for within 2 minutes, but also touch the aspects to do with the environmental impact assessment, whether in that area, our environment, as we aggressively undertake project, the environmental concerns, what we can take care of in just 2 minutes as we wrap up.
Thank you very much, FELIX. There are two things I think we need to appreciate, both from government and the community as citizens, that Uganda has a very complex land tenure system, and therefore you have overlapping rights over this land, and therefore at times when you are dealing with some of these rights, it takes quite some time. So when government is planning, that must be taken into consideration. The second thing that should be taken into consideration is the time when actually you do the evaluation and when you do the compensation. This business of doing the evaluation, but you've not appropriated the funds, and then you create this gap between when actually you've done the evaluation and when you appropriate funds and pay, must be dealt with, because that is very, very, very important. But going to the last point that you've raised, because the rest of the issues, I think WINFRED has talked about them that have to be taken into consideration. One of the areas that most of the time is ignored and why you may not see impacts in the short term are the environmental aspects. And many things are always ignored. Yes, very true. The social and environmental impact assessments have been done, and there are mitigation measures that have been talked about. Certificates have been issued with conditions, but one big challenge has been monitoring and enforcement. And this is not very surprising, because you also know that we've had other environmental laws in the country, but having the environmental laws has not stopped actually degradation of the environment. And that's why the citizens are a little bit worried that if we have laws, we have these penalties, and you've not been able to enforce these laws, what magic are we going to have now to ensure that these environmental and social impact assessment, the mitigation measures that have been proposed, are going to be implemented? So that is the biggest concern. Yes, there are a few areas, there are gaps that we see in these assessments, but the most critical thing is monitoring and enforcing the conditions that have been provided for in these certificates that have been approved. And that is the area where we need to strengthen our institutions. If you are talking about NEMA, you have to strengthen NEMA, but we must also deal with issues of corruption, so that these conditions that we put in place, the laws that we put in place, we are able to implement those laws. And I would say that FELIX, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, ONESMUS. Thank you so much. ONESMUS, who is the public rights analyst, and also is the advocate for High Court of Uganda and a member of Uganda Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Also with me, I had WINFRED, who is the executive director of Global Rights Alert, and he's also an active member of Publish Watch of the Uganda Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI, and we've been discussing Uganda's oil is a blessing or curse. Always a pleasure to have both of you. And I myself was FELIX KAFUUMA moderating this session. Till next time, bye-bye, take care.